Good evening, Professor Smith. We spoke earlier. I'm going to be making up my jigsaw project presentation. My name is Lauren Weaver. I am in your Monday 210 to 410 class for Education 220. I was assigned Chapter 4. So yeah, again, I'm making this up. I was out with bronchitis last Monday. And unfortunately I have chronic asthma, and so when I get sick my lungs usually take the brunt of it, and so it does take a little bit longer for me to get back up on the mend and get on my own 2 feet. And so God is always good. I'm thankful that I'm feeling better, still keeping up with the fluids and rest, but let's give this a shot and see what happens. So I prepared a PowerPoint for this presentation. It was ready last Monday. I was assigned Chapter 4, which is on classroom assessment and grading, which we did talk about in class today. I started with a warning saying that negative memories stick. It is psychologically and scientifically proven that memories stand out more in the brain if they are negatively influenced and impacted. So anyways, piggybacking off of that, it's important to improve student success via individual support for each student. I can't emphasize how not doing that, and having a negative attitude and mindset towards a student really does last and impact them. I could speak out of experience. I won't, since this is only supposed to be a 3-minute video, but really it's important to focus on classroom assessment so that student and teacher can both be doing better. The role of assessment in academic success, there's about 7 things, 7 roles that it can play in the, if you want to use a metaphor, in the theatrical sense. There's about 7 different roles that could be played by assessment. And so that is when you put into conjunction the pre-assessment, which is, testing a student's level of knowledge on a subject or on a lesson before it is actually taught and it is, kind of pushed into their mind and tested on and stuff. You're testing them beforehand to see what they're coming in with. So these 7 things are, it is the prelude to effective differentiation. It ensures a stimulated growth mindset in the student and teacher. It can help a teacher better get to know his or her students, to know what they're coming in with. It provides adequate academic profile for each student. It can be adaptive in both creative and instructional activity. It allows individual student periods, and because of that, it provides specific individual feedback. Coinciding with assessment, there are 3 types of academic assessment. There's diagnostic, formative, and summative. Diagnostic should never be graded. For example, think, pair, share, round robin, those type of activities that you do in a classroom setting that they are trying to incorporate more and more into different districts and schools. There's formative, which should sometimes be graded, but rarely, kind of like completion or a participation grade. And then there's formative, which should always be graded, such as oral assessments, written exams, essays, things of that nature. Tomlinson and Sousa, next, they talk about testing and stress. Fun fact for you, the word test actually does put emphasized stress onto the brain, even if it does propel a student to succeed and do better. As some say, being on our time test, it helps them, for example. That's great, but it still puts stress on the brain, even if it's positive stress. Kind of like when you're planning a wedding or a birthday party, there's a lot of stress on the brain, but it's exciting stress. It would be of that nature for a student who the stress does help them succeed. So I have a little rhyme down here. It talks about the lasting impacts of a class and how the heavier the exam, the heavier the stress, the heavier the class, the heavier the stress. But it's true, taking your time academically is important. The longer the class, the longer the impact. So long class, lingering impact. Fast-paced class, have no room in the brain. So the rhyme is long-term, lingering, fast-paced, no place. Fast-paced class, there's no place in the brain for that. So yeah, and then it talked about as an example that time tests are a negative idea, bad idea for students. So next, I talked about the 3 different stages of assessment in the classroom. There's assessment of learning, there's assessment for learning, and assessment as learning. I think I probably said those out of order. Assessment for learning would be a formative thing because you're assessing specific things that are going to be impacting the learning process. Assessment for the learning process. Assessment of learning would be, summative, because that's like an exam. You are looking to see the knowledge that the student can provide you, their comprehension on the subject that was taught. So it's an assessment of their learning. And then assessment as learning is you're assessing the process in which a student is learning. learning to differentiate for your students as individuals. And so that's kind of a diagnostic thing, but it could go either way depending on what subject and what activity level you are teaching at. So those are kind of the 3 stages of classroom assessment. Then they talk about the value of a report card in this chapter as well, and how those should be something that propel a student into a higher level thinking. They should not be used to trick students or to upset them or to judge them. They should be used to track students' progress. And piggybacking off of that, what can a teacher do to help his or her students have a higher regard for what their report card means? So there's a few things here that a teacher can do. They can have a growth mindset. They can obviously have a positive environment, be in a state of encouragement for their students, focus on reaching understanding and common ground with their student, communicating with students and focusing on instructional activity, giving a fair assessment of the student and teacher workload, and filling gaps for your student depending on their individual needs. Those are all things that can be done. A report card is just an example, but those are all things that can be done throughout the grading process and the learning process, learning by your students, that can be done to really help your students have a higher regard for what the report card shows and how important that is, because the teacher should show that they want their student to reach a point of progress. Grades should accurately reflect a student's efforts and a teacher's goals, and if they don't, there definitely needs to be a discussion between some individuals so that we can reach that point. Grades should not compare students or be used as a point of judgment again, and they should not be used against a student. I can't emphasize that enough. So I will also upload the PowerPoint for you to this evening, Professor Smith. Thank you so much for your time. I really hope you enjoy the rest of your evening, and I will see you in class next Monday.